I didn't want to do it at first, and they'd been after me to do one for about 2 years. And I thought, well, you know, there's going to be 22,000 people there, so we can throw in some new songs maybe and everything. But as it turned out, we didn't. We played all old songs, and they just sort of stared at us. And it was a strange experience, really. It was about 6 months ago.
For decades, the tragic death of Ricky Nelson has been clouded by mystery and dark speculation. On New Year's Eve 1985, his private plane went down in flames, and the story that spread like wildfire was that his own reckless lifestyle was to blame. But that wasn't the truth. After all these years, the full story has finally been pieced together from forgotten records and expert analysis. And what has been uncovered is far more disturbing than any tabloid rumor. So what really sparked the inferno that took his life? And who was truly responsible for the tragedy he was blamed for? We're about to reveal the answers that were buried for decades. Make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss what we found. Long before he was a rock and roll icon, Eric Ricky Nelson was a character in America's favorite real-life story. Born directly into show business as the son of entertainers Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, his life was on public display from the very beginning. His family's radio and television series, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, was a cultural phenomenon, broadcasting an idealized version of their lives into millions of homes throughout the 50s and 60s. Week after week, audiences watched Ricky grow from a curious child into a charismatic teenager, making him one of the most recognizable young faces in the country. He was the perfect son in the perfect family, the embodiment of wholesome, clean-cut American values. But while the nation adored the character he played, the real Ricky was listening to a sound his show would never feature. Beneath the polished family-friendly image, a rebellion was brewing, one that was about to challenge everything America thought they knew about him. That brewing rebellion exploded onto the music scene with a sound that shocked older generations: rock and roll. In 1957, he released his first single, a cover of Fats Domino's "I'm Walking," and it shot up the charts, turning the TV Sun into an overnight music sensation. Suddenly, Ricky Nelson wasn't just Ozzie and Harriet's kid. He was a teen idol in his own right. He masterfully used his family's wholesome television show as a secret weapon, performing his hits for millions and bringing rock music directly into suburban living rooms. With his smooth voice and clean-cut image, he made the controversial genre feel safe, becoming one of the most important figures in popularizing it. Hits like "Hello Mary Lou," "Travelin' Man," and "Poor Little Fool" followed, making him one of the top-selling artists of the era. He had become one of the biggest stars on the planet, a golden boy who could seemingly do no wrong. But the loyalty of a crowd is a fragile thing, and a single night in a packed arena would soon teach him a brutal lesson about what happens when you stop giving people exactly what they want. That brutal lesson came in 1971 at Madison Square Garden. On a stage where he should have been celebrated as a rock and roll pioneer, he was met with a chorus of boos. By then, musical tastes had drastically shifted, and Ricky had evolved too, embracing a more mature country rock sound with his Stone Canyon Band. But the crowd at the Oldies revival show that night didn't want the artist he had become. They demanded the teen idol he used to be. When he played his new material, the audience felt betrayed and turned on him. Stung by the rejection, Ricky didn't retreat. Instead, he channeled his frustration into what would become his final major hit, "Garden Party." The song was a defiant anthem about artistic integrity, with the iconic line, "You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself." It was his powerful declaration of independence, proving he wouldn't bow to public pressure. But the battle for his identity wasn't just being fought on stage. It had been raging behind closed doors for years. Long before any audience tried to keep him in a box, the most powerful force shaping his image was his own mother, Harriet Nelson. While the world saw a charismatic teen idol, behind the scenes, Harriet maintained a firm grip on his personal life. She was not just his mother, but also his co-star, and she was fiercely protective of the family's wholesome brand. Harriet openly disapproved of many of the young women Ricky dated, feeling they weren't up to the family's standards and could tarnish his carefully crafted career. This created a deep conflict for Ricky. He was one of the biggest stars in the world, a symbol of youthful rebellion, yet he constantly struggled against his mother's control over who he could be with. It seemed no one would meet her impossible expectations. But then, a young woman appeared who not only captured Ricky's heart, but, crucially, also won his mother's official approval, setting the stage for what the world believed would be a perfect Hollywood union. That woman was Sharon Kristen Harmon, the daughter of football legend Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox. Their wedding in 1963 was a Hollywood spectacle, uniting two powerful dynasties in what the public saw as a fairy tale match. On the surface, everything looked perfect. They had 4 children: Tracy, who became an actress, twin sons Gunnar and Matthew, who would later form the chart-topping band Nelson, and their youngest son, Sam. They were American royalty, continuing a celebrated family legacy. But behind the glamorous photos, deep fractures were forming. Ricky's relentless touring schedule, driven by his desire to rejuvenate his career, kept him constantly on the road. Meanwhile, Chris reportedly struggled with the intense pressures of their high-profile life. An emotional chasm grew between them, fueled by growing distance and rumors of infidelity. The dream was dissolving into a private nightmare, and the quiet resentment was about to explode into a messy, public war that would shatter the family's image forever. That public war unfolded in the cold reality of a courtroom. The storybook romance descended into one of Hollywood's most contentious and painful divorces, playing out for all to see. It was a brutal, lengthy battle, not just over money, but over custody of their children and control of the public narrative. The Nelson family's carefully protected image of wholesomeness was shattered as private struggles became public record. The proceedings were emotionally draining for everyone, but they hit Ricky especially hard, and the melancholy themes began to surface in his later music. When the divorce was finally finalized in December 1982, the nearly 2-decade marriage was officially over. Emotionally and financially bruised, Ricky threw himself back into what he knew best: performing. He lined up a tour to close out 1985, but a fateful flight to a New Year's Eve show was about to bring his story to a shocking and tragic end. The final day of 1985 began with the promise of a new year. Ricky Nelson, his fiancée Helen Blair, and his band boarded a vintage Douglas DC-3 aircraft, headed for a New Year's Eve concert in Dallas. For the touring musicians, it was supposed to be just another flight on another job, with a celebration waiting for them at the other end. But somewhere high above rural Texas, that routine journey turned into an absolute nightmare. A fire suddenly erupted on board, and thick, toxic smoke began to pour into the main cabin, giving the passengers no time to react and nowhere to escape. The plane went down. While the 2 pilots miraculously survived the crash landing, everyone in the cabin perished. The news of the rock star's death was devastating, but in the immediate chaos and confusion, a dark and insidious story began to form, a story that would unfairly define his final moments for years to come. The insidious story that took hold wasn't about a tragic accident. The narrative that dominated the headlines claimed that Ricky Nelson himself had caused the deadly fire while engaging in reckless behavior with illicit substances on board. This scandalous theory spread quickly, painting a dark picture of the star's final moments. The official investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board only added to the confusion. While they ruled that the fire started in the cabin, they couldn't determine the exact ignition source, leaving a vacuum that the ugliest rumors rushed to fill. But there was one critical piece of evidence that these stories conveniently ignored: the toxicology reports. They came back completely clean, showing no illicit substances or alcohol in Ricky's system. And yet, because the scandalous story was more compelling, the rumor persisted for decades, staining his legacy. The truth, however, was hiding not in scandal, but in dusty maintenance logs and overlooked records, and its eventual discovery would reveal something far more horrifying. The horrifying truth, pieced together years later by determined investigators, had nothing to do with scandal. The fire wasn't an act of rock and roll excess. It was a catastrophe sparked by pure negligence. The culprit was the aircraft's faulty cabin heater. Records and witness accounts revealed that the heater on the old DC-3 was notoriously unreliable and had been the subject of previous complaints. More damningly, it had been jury-rigged with improper, makeshift repairs that violated aviation safety standards, essentially turning it into a ticking time bomb. On that final flight, it malfunctioned, sparking a fire that instantly filled the cabin with toxic smoke. With no onboard fire extinguisher or proper fire retardant materials, the passengers had absolutely no chance. The decades of ugly rumors were silenced by this stark, mechanical truth. Ricky Nelson was not a victim of his own choices, but of a system that completely failed him. This chilling reality doesn't just solve the mystery. It fundamentally changes the entire story. So what is Ricky Nelson's legacy now that the truth is known? For decades, his death was framed as a cautionary tale about the excesses of fame, a narrative that was easy for people to accept. But the real story is a far more unjust and chilling cautionary tale about simple negligence. This was a man who spent his life fighting for his own identity, first by breaking free from his TV persona, then by standing up to crowds who wanted to keep him frozen in the past. He fought to be an authentic artist on his own terms. The ultimate bitter irony is that his life was ended not by any choice he made, but by the irresponsible choices of others. He wasn't the casualty of the rock and roll lifestyle he was so often associated with. He was a casualty of gross incompetence. This knowledge forces us to remember him differently, not as a cliché, but as a pioneer and a father whose life was cut short for no good reason. A final tragedy in a life that was far more complex than the public ever knew. In the end, the story of Ricky Nelson is one of immense talent defined by constant conflict. He was the wholesome TV son who became a rock and roll rebel, the beloved teen idol who faced public rejection, and the family man whose perfect life unraveled for the world to see. For decades, the final, tragic chapter of his life was unfairly twisted by a false narrative. Now, the solved mystery replaces those dark rumors with a truth that is far less sensational, but infinitely more heartbreaking. His life wasn't lost to his own choices, but to a faulty heater and a chain of inexcusable negligence. There is no comfort in this resolution, only the grim reality of a preventable loss. His music endures, but the story of his death is a permanent cautionary tale. We have presented the facts as we understand them today. If you feel there is anything we have missed or gotten wrong, please let us know in the comments below.